Did you know that Margaret Thatcher was indirectly and unintentionally responsible for the biggest British band of the 1990s? This is the story of the 1988 gig that sowed the seeds that would result in the formation of OASIS. But to tell this story properly, we need to wind the clock back further than that for a moment, and focus in on a loudmouthed northern troublemaker, youngest of three brothers in Burnage, Manchester, Liam Gallagher. Today, Liam is known as a magnetic, aggressive, laddish character who speaks his mind, is confrontational, generally quite funny, and takes great pleasure in winding people up. Apparently, he was no different as a kid. Listen to this from his older brother. Everything was a game to him. He was hyperactive. It would be, "Paul, can I play some of your records?" I'd reply, "No, you can't, don't go near them." Half an hour later, screech. I'd run upstairs and there would be Liam, scratching all my records one by one. One day he came home and asked our mum to buy him a violin. But when he went to secondary school, he learned that at 11 and 12 you can get more respect off other kids for bashing people in the head. And that in Burnage, anyone who plays the violin is a sissy, so that went out of the window too. According to various reports, Liam as a child was a mad little thing. Probably some genuine kind of hyperactivity thing, I don't know. He was both crazy and charismatic. Music was always nearby, but it was his older brother, Noel, who was the music-obsessed one. Liam's life trajectory and his personality, however, were about to take a left-field turn because he got into a scrap with a bunch of kids from a rival school.
Well, Liam was allegedly the cock of the school. No one messed with him. I think one day some rival school turned up and boshed him on the head with an hammer.
We were stood there having a cig. I remember older lads coming down. This kid's pulled out this little fucking hammer and went whack on my head. From that day on, I know it sounds stupid, but it was like as if something had fucking clicked, you know what I mean? I started hearing music. It started making sense, you know what I mean?
Somebody hammered the music into him. He's got a fucking lot to answer for, hasn't he?
Following the fight, Liam was suspended indefinitely from school, and not for the first time, I might add. After 3 weeks, they took him back, after making it clear that this was it. If he ever stepped out of line again, he would be out. Liam was a wild teenage lad with fire in his belly, who was finding it difficult to fit in a world that demanded polite, respectable behaviour. But now, strangely, after the hammer attack, Liam now had music on the mind. Looking back later, he would point out that all his mates at this time were just into dance music. He hadn't yet found his musical path. All he had as yet was a sense that somewhere out there was his musical calling, waiting to be uncovered. It would be at the age of 15 that the lightning would strike. In the year 1988, Liam was still at secondary school. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK, and her government were responsible for something called the Local Government Act, which was notorious for one section in particular, Section 28, which, amongst other things, banned any positive representation of homosexuality in schools. There was, in February of that year, a massive protest in Manchester where 25,000 people attended, including Sir Ian McKellen. And as part of the campaign against Section 28, Paul Cons and Dave Haslam set up a fundraising concert. Manchester band James were booked to be the headliners, and the Stone Roses agreed to be the support act. At this time, however, the Stone Roses were still pretty underground. They were mainly known in Manchester. They hadn't yet released their defining debut album. They'd only actually put out 2 singles at this point. The first one, which was called So Young, came out in 1985. It was pretty poor and basically did nothing. And then, 2 years later, in 1987, they released Sally Cinnamon. This was early days for the Stone Roses, but they were nonetheless on the rise. Liam's older brother Noel had bought the Sally Cinnamon single and loved it.
When I heard Sally Cinnamon for the first time, I knew what my destiny was.
And the same was true of the headliners, James. They too hadn't fully broken through into the mainstream yet. But with 2 local bands on the rise on the bill, the gig was looking promising indeed. Behind the scenes, however, in the run-up to the gig, all was not well between the headliners and the support act. When posters went up to promote the show, James were accurately billed as the headliners, the Stone Roses as support. But apparently the Stone Roses also went around putting up their own versions of the posters all over town, where they were actually the headliners and James were the support act. Nonetheless, the gig sold out. It promised to be an excellent night. But when the night itself rolled around and it was time for the Stone Roses to go on stage, according to organiser Dave Haslam, they apparently refused. He says, "I spent far too much time going back and forth between the two dressing rooms. The Roses didn't want to suffer the usual fate of a support band, to play in front of a less than full house. They hung on, doing everything they could to delay their set. Meanwhile, James, and singer Tim Booth in particular, were annoyed and wound up by what they considered to be unprofessional behaviour. Eventually, the Roses took to the stage around an hour later than had been agreed. They would later also in future lie about this gig, claiming that they had never played support act to any other band." Here's the singer of James, Tim Booth, talking about it.
So I remember that day, and I remember the Stone Roses playing and being good, very good. And later on, they were like, "We've never supported any band." And it was like, well, that's not quite true, actually. You did support us in that concert.
When the Stone Roses eventually went on stage, frontman Ian Brown was doing absolutely nothing to reduce the obnoxious vibes. As one reviewer wrote, singer Ian Brown starts throwing pints and sarcasm all over the unsuspecting audience. Not very nice at all. But then he does fancy himself as a bit of a star. He's whirling around like a demented muppet, crooning to no one in particular, and you want to hate the guy. The songs are so mellifluous though, in an undertone sort of way, that you just get sucked in. And to some degree, that was true, because standing alone, at the back, in the dark, was a 15-year-old Liam Gallagher. Watching the snarling arrogance and punk vibes on stage, he was in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. And all of a sudden, the lightning struck. The gig itself, the music, is actually quite special. It's a high-powered driving set. Drummer Rennie is particularly good behind the kit, the band are tight, the songs are fast, and the set packs a real punch. Rose's frontman Ian Brown is also bang in tune for the majority of the set. But when it comes to the song I Am the Resurrection towards the end of the set, the singing, the timing, the harmonies just become, all of a sudden, apocalyptically hilariously bad. It seems to happen as if someone just flicked a switch, and I mean it's so laughably bad that if you wanted to do a takeoff of it, there's literally nowhere else to go. It's already as stupid as it can get. And here's what I think happened. This was a gig with a curfew. Almost every gig in the UK has got a time limit, particularly if it's one within city limits. Remember the Stone Roses had gone on stage an hour late because they weren't willing to play to a not yet full house? Well, I reckon they were asked when they went on to be considerate and cut their set short so that they didn't eat into the time allotted to the headliners. I also think, bearing in mind how they behaved in every other regard backstage, that they just ignored the request and did what they wanted. So I reckon the sound engineers probably turned off the monitors to try and get them off stage. It's the only explanation I can come up with for the sudden, jarring, collapsing quality. Have a listen. Also in the audience that night was Noel Gallagher, who had gone along to celebrate his 21st birthday, which had been just the day before. And that gig for him was a turning point, a fork in the road that sent his life bouncing down a completely different direction. Noel said, "At this gig I see a guy on the balcony and he's got a little tape recorder. The red light's on and he's obviously bootlegging the gig. So I go up to him and ask for a tape, and I give him my address, and he asks me what bands I'm into. I said I like the Waltones, Happy Mondays and the Inspiral Carpets, and he said I'm in the Inspiral Carpets. We kept in contact, and that's how it all started for me." And as any Oasis nerd will know, that connection between Noel Gallagher and the Inspiral Carpets resulted in his first proper job in the music industry. They hired him as a roadie, and so he was able to go all over the world with the band, meeting people, seeing how everything worked backstage, and learning the ropes of the industry. But while Noel was shaking hands and making connections at this gig, Liam Gallagher was having a much more personal, life-altering experience.
I was desperate to see this band. I'd heard the records because my brother Noel was playing them, Sally Cinnamon and stuff, and I thought, I like this stuff. The good old days. I asked my mum for 15 quid to go to the gig. The first record I bought was the Stone Roses. First gig again was the Stone Roses in International 2, actually, on Plymouth Grove. Went down there, bought a ticket off of Tickets Out. And I know Tickets Outs get a bad kicking these days, but if it weren't for Tickets Outs, I don't know where they'd be these days. And they come on, they want to be adored. Zine Brown comes on with these mare bells bouncing about. So it was me and my mate Dave just stood there leaning against the wall thinking it's the best thing ever. They had everything. They had the tunes, the guitars, went with the clothes. They were normal, you know what I mean? They just looked like lads, you know what I mean? Like their mates that we play football with. I seen these lot, I thought, this is as good as we've got to be, you know what I mean? And then that was it. That was my epiphany. And the crowd were up for it, and I don't know, it changed my life without a doubt. After that, I went home. Mum said I was a gig. Said it was amazing. Said to her, I'm going to join a band. She's like, well, you better, because you owe me 15 quid. But yeah, I thought I could definitely go and do that if I find the right guys, and I did. And that was it. That's the one that changed my life.
They say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And while the Stone Roses were seemingly hostile to the band they were meant to be supporting, there was something about that swaggering punk edge that also, on the other side of the coin, simultaneously set Liam Gallagher free. It can be incredibly isolating for young teenage lads with a bit of fire in their bellies to be constantly told as they get older that they have to conform, to submit, to lose all their inner rebel and become just another beige, faceless cog in the machine. When I listen back to it now, yes, the gig was good, but I wonder if the music really was the biggest thing that hit Liam Gallagher so hard. I suspect that it was more that in a world full of people constantly telling him to shut up and to behave, here was a band of Manc lads just a little older than he was, being absolute punks in every sense of the word, and making a life for themselves in which they were not being stamped out, but rather admired. Here was a band from Manchester, singing in their own accents, living life on their own terms, keeping their obnoxious punk edge and actually succeeding. That feeling can be incredibly intoxicating to a 15-year-old northern lad. I know of what I speak because that's how a whole generation of 15-year-old lads that I was a part of felt when OASIS ascended to even greater heights in the 90s. I remember seeing Noel and Liam on screen as a young 13-year-old lad myself and going, you're no different to me. Of course, it was just a sense, it was just a feeling, but that feeling made you believe you could conquer the world.
When we seen the Stone Roses, we thought, yeah, well, we can do that.
And
we can be in the back.
He has already been doing it.
So we just thought, well, if they can do it, we can do it.
And I think that's what Liam experienced when he saw the Stone Roses live that night. And you know what? Though we live in a different world with different rules today, that moment of realisation of, I could bloody well do that, is just as true today as it was in 1988. Who do you look at and go, I want to do what you're doing? In the words of a bunch of lads from the north of England who did it, make it happen. And that's how Margaret Thatcher was, indirectly and unintentionally, responsible for starting the chain reaction that resulted in the formation of the biggest British band of the 1990s. Hello! Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, particularly if you were there at that gig. Massive thanks, as always, to all my supporters on Patreon. If you would like to be credited at the end of videos and to get access to exclusive bonus content, the link is down in the description. And, as always, I'll see you next time.